Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and well, nearly 4 whole videos in the span of 24 hours. This is turning out to be quite the day. Now, whilst I will be going over the overall criticisms about GB News in a moment, it should be worth noting that according to Nigel Farage, GB News is allegedly under attack. Under attack from what? I don't know. But then again, much like Farage's tie's sake, he could be seeing the pink elephants again. So probably the ones who convinced him way back when that Brexit was a good idea. So, all right, lay it on me, Farage. What exactly is GB News attacked from? But, well, I can probably tell you exactly what it is. You know, Ofcom, the public, and that all of the repercussions of everybody associated with GB News, they are starting to finally catch up with them. So let's get to it.
GB News is under threat. The other broadcasters don't like it. Adam Bolton, longtime veteran of Sky News, said that GB News was damaging the ecosystem of broadcasting, by which he means it's our little club. And we don't question climate change or mass immigration. We thought EU membership was wonderful. How dare you come along and give us a hard time? Now, the problems are getting very, very real. The industry is regulated by Ofcom. They have decided to put my programme under investigation on the basis, they say, that I'm a politician. Well, you know what? Even I'm a celebrity, get me out of here. Had me as an ex-politician. I am not actively involved in politics at all, but they don't like it. And some more of the great and the good are hosting a conference in Sheffield. Have a look at this. I mean, it's absolutely bizarre. They're saying that GB News is a threat to democracy, so it must be closed down. No sense of irony from these people whatsoever. They don't agree with much of what is said, therefore they simply want the channel closed down. And I also think that the big political parties perhaps don't like GB News too much because it does genuinely question many of the things that are going wrong in this country, and around which
I'll get back to that.
There is a huge consensus in Westminster. Worse than that, we have a situation where commercial television and radio survives through advertisements. That model has been there for a very, very long time. But there's an organisation called Stop Funding Hate, who seem themselves to have quite a lot of money. And if anybody advertises on GB News, they will get dozens of emails every day from Stop Funding Hate, saying you're funding a channel that is damaging democracy, you're funding a channel that is causing division. And frankly, you know, if you're a marketing officer for a holiday company and you're bombarded by nicely aggressive emails, you probably think, you know what, we can't be bothered with this. So we're under assault from the regulator, we're under assault from the rest of the industry, we're under assault in terms of our advertising, without which keeping the channel going long term is not easy. But there's a reason, folks, why all this is happening. You won't really hear much about this, but here goes. You might have noticed that gbnews.com is growing rapidly. In fact, it is the fastest growing news website in the country and has been for the last 10 consecutive months. We are now the 12th most read news website in this country. And within a couple of weeks, I think we're going to be in the top 10. So they don't like the fact we're doing so well online. But what really depresses them is what's happening with live viewing. Now, look, I get it. Lots of you now watch things on catch-up. Lots of you watch things on clips. But there are still people that still tune in. So my show goes out on GB News, 7 to 8 p.m, Monday to Thursday. And if you look at these figures, these are the figures for the last week or so. And they will show you that my show every single night beats the BBC News channel. It beats Sky News. It beats what's left of Talk TV. In fact, on several of those evenings, if you add up all the other news channels, even together, their number is not as high as my show. And across the whole day, we had a period just gone where for 6 out of 8 days, the channel beat Sky News across the whole day. Our numbers are going up, both live, on catch-up, on YouTube, on all forms of social media. The industry now sees us as a threat. The political establishment see us as a challenge. I sense there is an epic battle coming between now and the general election. There will be every attempt made to get me off air, and every attempt made, frankly, to even get GB News off air. You know, all these people in Westminster, the political class, the media class, they don't believe in choice. They don't believe in real debate. They basically think that anybody with a different point of view should be cancelled and shut down. Well, let me assure you, we are going to fight like hell, and we're not going to let them win. And if you believe in free speech, open debate, where you hear both sides of an argument, please, please support us in whatever way you can at GB News, because we are under serious attack.
Okay, so we heard Nigel Farage's point of view. He claims that GB News is under attack because of their popularity, and they believe that there is conspiracies about people who say that they are a threat to democracy because of their popularity. They claim that they offer both sides of a debate, and they claim that it's all of this is down to, you know, the people in Westminster, broadcast regulators, Ofcom. They believe all of these things. So one thing, you may have heard me mention this time and time again, ladies and gentlemen, about accountability and responsibility. Now, people may argue that absolutely the case that I've got no right whatsoever to talk about this, considering that Nigel Farage has had decades of experience working in politics. Unfortunately, once again, ladies and gentlemen, and as I said this before, is that criticism is not harassment. And there is nothing wrong with actually criticizing somebody because of the things they say and the things they do. Because unbeknownst to people who don't want to hear this, they'll suggest the idea that the only reason I'm making this at all is because I have a biased opinion as someone who votes Labour, and therefore my opinions are evidently going to sway in the direction of Labour, or preferably towards the left wing, towards things that I fundamentally believe in, like socialism, and the ideas that actually hate speech should not be a recurrent. Well, you know, things that actually are pretty fairly common. Again, they fall under the realms of socialism. But this isn't really necessarily to talk about socialism. This is to talk about the fact that one thing you probably noticed throughout this is that not once has Farage even listed anything that he suggests that actually could portray GB News in a bad light. Because that's how you create a very biased agenda and something of a conflict of interest, is when you, and I mean when you say that the only reason why we are under attack is because we are popular. Well, for reasons I'm about to go under, ladies and gentlemen, these accusations and these concerns about a threat to democracy, or rather the substantial number of people who turn to them, and, well, whether those statistics are reliable and where they got the resources for these. I mean, I don't disbelieve in the idea that GB News is been on the rise in comparison to Talk TV and Sky News, but let's get into the things that actually GB News probably needs to be aware of. And, well, we will probably get into this video as well about a bit more of a concise form about the things that Nigel Farage does not want to tell you about. As I've said before, ladies and gentlemen, and I'll say it again, you can actually engage a lot from a politician, or any person for that matter, by what they don't say. And bear that in mind. So let's just go through these one at a time. And I take my source from The Guardian, and I like The Guardian. Listen, I read The Guardian anyway, so call that what you will. They don't need to like pander or give or panhandle me BS. You know what? You don't always believe what you hear, ladies and gentlemen. But for the context of what we're going to get into, you may be under the impression that these aren't just the things that Farage could say, well, that's because they're a threat to us because we're popular. No, these are actually things that kind of need to be addressed. So GB News is being allowed to break impartiality rules, says senior TV figures. Ofcom is accused of not treating all broadcasters the same and of dragging its feet with investigations into right-wing channel. Now, if you want an explanation for this, is that, well, Well, we'll get into this, and we'll probably explain why Rishi Sunak is on GB News. GB News is being allowed to violate broadcast impartiality while Ofcom is failing to take tough action against the channel, senior broadcasting veterans have claimed. They include former ITN chief Stuart Purvis and broadcaster Adam Bolton, who expressed unease over Conservative MPs fronting GB News shows, in some cases interviewing each other. They were also concerned over the prominence of Nigel Farage, who has yet to rule out an election run for reform. GB News is currently facing 13 Ofcom investigations relating to allegations of lack of impartiality and fairness, in several instances linked to shows hosted by Conservative MPs, many of them going back almost a year. Jacob Rees-Mogg, who is paid about £350,000 a year by the broadcaster, plus Esther McVeigh, now a minister, and Philip Davies, a Tory backbencher, are among those with shows under scrutiny. Some of these cases are very old, and you find yourself thinking, what are they waiting for, said Purvis, the former ITN Director General. GB News disputes the allegations regarding impartiality. Earlier this week, Ofcom launched an investigation into whether a GB News programme where Prime Minister Rishi Sunak took questions from the public breached impartiality rules by failing to include other political viewpoints. It's said that the inquiry into the Sunak show indicates a worrying trend towards a selective, narrow interpretation of Ofcom's rules and excessive intervention in purely editorial matters, which stands to inhibit those freedoms it claims to support. A spokesperson added, GB News chose to be regulated by Ofcom and takes its compliance obligations seriously. However, a string of former TV news executives said they believe GB News is riding roughshod over the principle of impartiality, with the clock ticking for the broadcasting regulator to complete inquiries as a general election looms. Bolton, the former Sky News political editor, told The Guardian that GB News is deliberately taking the piss in terms of violating the conventions that we have grown up with in British broadcasting, of attempting to be duly impartial. Frankly, Ofcom has been supine for understandable reasons, because it's been clear that the government of the day is sympathetic to GB News. Balance and impartiality means that you present, even-handedly, a broad range of opinions, aware that you have to be prepared to respond to complaints that people think you're being unfair. What we've got with GB News is conservative and right-wing politicians interviewing each other, essentially a mix of softball questions to them and right-wing politics. My understanding, as someone with 40 years of experience in broadcasting, is that they would be seen by most people as a violation of the rules. John Soppel, a former BBC News chief political correspondent who spent 8 years as its North American editor, said, "In the US, I witnessed the polarization of TV, where it was not news to inform but to affirm what people already thought. And I thought that there was such a dangerous road to go down." I'm not suggesting that we have reached that point in the UK, but we have had a broadcasting ecosystem where there has been a duty to uphold impartiality and to report the news fairly. One just has to wonder what anyone would make of the BBC staging a Q&A with one party leader in the week of a by-election, or, for example, it gave a show to a Labour MP. I have a lot of respect for Ofcom, but what I cannot understand is it allowing GB News to do things that no other broadcaster would be allowed to get away with. Purvis took issue with Ofcom's explanation and that politicians could present current affairs programmes, but not news programmes, challenging it to cite whether it says this in either the regulation, legislation, or accompanying guidance. The answer is that it does not say it anywhere, added Purvis, who said that the only place where Ofcom had claimed this was in the form of a blog written last year by Kevin Bankhurst, an executive at the regulator who later left to become RTE Director General. You can only interpret this somehow of Ofcom trying to clear the way for MPs to present programmes and interview MPs from the same party. Noting that GB News was now calling itself the election channel, Purvis said, There were also questions about the use of the slogan, including on the recent Sunak question and answer show. Can you have a program which goes under the banner of the election channel, where the leader of one party has a chance to talk to voters, but there's no mention of any other party leader, he asked. One former senior ITV political news executive said, "We all assume that we couldn't populate shows with people overwhelmingly from one perspective. It was almost understated that Ofcom would take a dim view if you were to cast a program in a way that was imbalanced." But it turns out that GB News can do it. And we've been wrong all these years, and Ofcom is relaxed about you unloading the dice against one side and making a polemicial program. It's staggering. I don't know if that's because the code is weaker than we thought, or if there is a perspective inside Ofcom that is more let rip than we thought it was. Chris Bantalava, a former Ofcom Director of Standards and ex-member of its content board, said that the broadcasting code was not designed or established to permit politicians to present programs mostly coming from one political party or political position. There are due impartiality rules, and they are set both in legislation and broadcasting code, and it is arguable that Ofcom is not regulating GB News to the same standard as other providers, most obviously Sky, ITV and the BBC, said Bantalava, a member of Sky's board. Bantalava said Ofcom needed to also act to clear the deck on its investigations into GB News before the election to prevent itself from being seen as doing the bidding of the party in power at the time. If there are accusations that they are not investigating because it's right-leaning and there is a Conservative government, then it really needs to act before the election, when Labour could win, because afterwards it will be seen as only reacting to left-wing concerns. An Ofcom spokesperson said the regulator acts with complete independence under the powers given to us by Parliament. Government has no role or influence in our decision-making. Under the Broadcasting Code, politicians cannot act as a newsreader, interviewer, or reporter in any news programmes unless exceptionally it is editorially justified. The rule is clear that this applies only to news content. Our rules apply equally to all broadcasters, and where we have cause to investigate, we publish fully reasoned decisions based on all the evidence at all times. We take into account the fundamental importance of freedom of expression and the media plurality. And that is actually where we are actually at the end right now. And now, some may argue that all I'm doing is exactly what GB News is doing by taking a somewhat biased perspective, by typically going towards a left-leaning newspaper or news outlet like The Guardian. But at the same time, do you honestly suspect that the Daily Express, the Telegraph, the Times, the Sun, or the Daily Mail are going to be writing about the GB News with a scathing level of evidence about regulations, codes, and the fact that Ofcom seems to have a very shilly-shally approach to this? Now, technically, yes, you could argue that GB News hasn't actually done anything wrong. However, it's the fact that it's only doing right under what they have, and that is to exclude anyone with any left-leaning opinions whatsoever. And again, by the time we get a Labour government, you'll be wondering if one of two things, whether or not GB News is still going to be a thing, or whether or not it's going to be completely reactionary, and their scale of reporting is going to change so drastically that it will scrutinise, catalogue every single detail, thereby proving what everyone thought they were and being biased. Because what if they didn't do that to the same level of standards as they were for this current government? Then how can we trust them to do the same thing for the governments in the future? That's just from GB News, from the Guardian's perspective. And, well, I will say there's quite a lot more, ladies and gentlemen, because, trust me, if you think this is the end of this, oh no, sorry, there is a lot more to this. And it's also written in things like, like I said here, look at what it says here in the Telegraph from 28th of December 2023. Why GB News has left its left-leaning rivals running scared. What did I say? You really think that the Telegraph or any of the others are going to respond to these accusations with the same level of scathing degree of evidence? Meanwhile, there is also this, to just straight up go for the ideas about GB News or fake news as it goes. So I'll just highlight this. GB News is an attempt at bringing Fox News-style biased news to the UK. Once again, you would argue immediately that this so-called British, I want my country back, it seems as if we're trying to make it more American. So why exactly we would need to do that, I have no idea. The news channel has anti-woke political positions and a range of right-wing, pro-government, pro-Brexit, and coronavirus conspiracist presenters. Many are even former Brexit party politicians. None of this is normal for a news channel. Biased presenters. Andrew Neil. While better known for his BBC appearances, Andrew Neil has long been the publisher of right-wing magazine The Spectator. He is a frequent critic of woke politics, even naming a regular segment Woke Watch in his flagship GB News evening show. Neil says the channel is proud to be British, but he lives in the south of France. Alexandra Phillips. Phillips is a former Brexit Party MEP from 2019 to 2020, and before that was head of media at UKIP. She worked for the SCL Group, the parent company of Cambridge Analytica, on the 2017 election campaign in Kenya, which saw fake news spread across the country. Tom Harwood. Tom Harwood is a former staffer for far-right blog Guido Fawkes, which attacks progressives under the guise of being a journalistic outlet. He was the chair of pro-Brexit campaign Group Students for Britain and a Tory local council candidate in 2018. Andrew Doyle, a comedian and writer for Spiked Online. Doyle created the character Titania McGrath to mock woke culture and wrote a parody book, Woke, A Guide to Social Justice, under that name. Michelle Dewberry. Dewberry was a vocal Brexit supporter and is a former Brexit Party general elections candidate circa 2019. Iniana Florian Iman. Another former Brexit Party candidate and writer for Spiked Online, Iman is a critic of woke thinking, who called the Black Lives Matter protest an opportunistic pretext for an outpouring of self-righteous rage. Dan Wooton. Former Sun columnist and talk radio presenter, Dan Wooton used his first broadcast on GB News to peddle coronavirus conspiracies, saying there is an attempt to turn Britain into ultra-cautious biosecurity state copying the likes of China, and railing against doomsday scientists who were addicted to the power. With the government running a COVID scare campaign, he has kept up this position in the show since and invited many lockdown skeptics on as guests. And Neil Oliver. Oliver is a lockdown skeptic who has called the coronavirus lockdown the single biggest mistake in world history. And finally, shadowy funders. GB News funders include Sir Paul Marshall, Brexit-backing hedge fund manager, Lord Farmer and Lord Spencer, two former Conservative Party treasuries, Legantum, a Dubai-based investment fund best known for funding pro-Brexit think tank, the Legatum Institute, and the US television group Discovery. Moreover, right-wing executives. GB News CEO Angelos Frangokopoulos made his name running Sky News Australia, which, unlike UK Sky News, runs a steady diet of strident right-wing conservative opinion, more aligned with Fox News. The channel's co-founders are Andrew Cole and Mark Schneider. Cole has called the BBC possibly the most biased propaganda machine in the world. He says, GB News will campaign against MPs, members of the Lords and civil servants who acted against the UK and in favour of a foreign entity, the EU, during the Brexit years. Schneider is a member of the Republicans Overseas, the group for supporters of Trump's party living outside the US. The two met through their shared idea for a British version of Fox News. So, So basically what we've got, ladies and gentlemen, is that we've got a channel that is run by people who has been like financed by people in Dubai, financed entirely by conservative treasuries, is also found together under the pretense of it not being a British run channel in terms of abiding by the standards, but rather by abiding by the standards that would be not very out of place if this was America. Bear in mind, they wanted to call this the British version of Fox News. And for anyone who's had any experience with Fox News will know fine well that is just about the biggest example of exploitation by any news outlet in the world. And the idea of things being associated or anything coming out of any Rupert Murdoch Empire-owned publication in any way, shape or form is absolutely, well, as you might expect, insane. And despite everything else we read from everything that's biased and everything that suggests that there is some pretty major codes that GB News is either walking a very thin line on or is so completely far on the other end that I'm surprised that we may as well not add a 14th investigation as to why the other 13 were not finalized and there was a very definite conclusion to their matters. You know what I don't see on any of this? Anyone with any left-leaning ideologies or with any left-leaning backgrounds whatsoever. It's the sort of thing that makes you wonder if because I'm pretty sure Lee Anderson has been a guest on GB News every so often, but it makes you wonder why they would even invite him if he originally started off in Labour. Or is it just because of what Lee Anderson's motives were at the moment? Now, outside of this, ladies and gentlemen, and bear in mind, despite all this, Farage makes you want to think that
GB News is under threat.
Yes, Nigel Farage still wants you to think that they are still under threat and they haven't done anything wrong just because they're popular. Meanwhile, for those who are watching and who dislike GB News and Fox News and all the rest of it, if you're somebody who doesn't like those things, and I'm not saying you have to, be the biggest fanboy for the BBC or anything like that, but if you especially don't like GB News, well, here are some little helpful things just before we end off. The 6 things you could do to stop GB News' fake news. 1. Don't watch. Avoid watching GB News and ask others to do the same. There are many alternatives that, whatever their flaws, are not pushing a right-wing ideological project, but it's not just about if you don't like it, don't watch it. Biased news can still poison our society even if you individually don't watch it. That's why the other steps are necessary too. 2. Don't appear. If you're invited to appear on GB News in any capacity, whether for an interview or as part of a debate, refuse and then let people know that you have done so. Ask others, especially public figures, to back out if they mention plans to appear. You may feel it is important to put your case, but by taking part, you will legitimize biased views. And you will be victimized, will be sent threats. There's loads of, again, from what I understand is that they don't like it whenever I call them out on this sort of thing. So yeah, you could easily, again, like the crocodile, they will always strike at the weakest spot. And well, you know immediately like what their weak spots are because I've just spent nearly 30 minutes going over them. Don't give permission. Reporters covering breaking news often pop up on social media asking for permission to use footage or photos from the scene. Say no to them in a public reply. This is already often done for right-wing newspapers. Treat GB News the very same way. Because like I said, the Daily Telegraph wants you to make you believe that because of the success of GB News, it's sending all lefties running with their tails between their legs. 4. Don't, quote, tweet. Twitter encourages you to, quote, tweet posts you disagree with in order to add a stinging rebuke. Stop. When you quote tweet GB News, even if your intent is clearly to oppose or mock, you are telling the Twitter algorithm that their tweets are engaging. That makes Twitter show GB News tweets to more people. 5. Don't fund it. If companies you buy from advertise on GB News when you are funding the channel, write to advertisers to tell them that this is not acceptable and you will no longer use their product unless they stop. Use the Twitter hashtag #Don'tFundGBNews to get updates on which companies are advertising. And finally, fittingly to end this video, don't give up. GB News is relying on attitudes to its softening over time. After an initial wave of opposition, that would mean biased news becoming an established part of Britain's media landscape. We must never let biased news become normalised. Keep insisting on the boycott and arguing with anyone who breaks it. We can stop GB News if we stand together and deny it the oxygen of publicity by refusing to engage in any way. Their culture war is about attention seeking for profit. Don't give in to them. I especially agree with this last part. It's not really for any real political agenda. It's about them trying to make money. Please bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's appeared on GB News recently, apparently made £6 million in profit this previous year, and he took a loan out on it so that he doesn't actually have to pay any tax. That's the sort of opposition we're up against. We're up against people who should be, but will absolutely just decide through either loopholes in the law to just not pay it. In my opinion, nobody should be allowed to get away with this, and as long as I've got a hole in my arse, I will stand for this, ladies and gentlemen. I will stand to continue to not let GB News win. And again, you may think that means that I've chosen my side and that you're going to have a hard time dissuading me. Well, two things about that. First is that, remember, if you want me to vote Conservative or you want me to vote Reform, then I suggest you actually try and put forward cases to suggest that you can persuade my decision. Because just throwing insults at me, thinking that I'm just a lefty and therefore nothing's going to sway my mind, well, again, insulting me and just trying to say whatever you like, that's a very curious and nonchalant approach to politics. Aren't you supposed to be convincing me that we should be on the same side? You know what I mean? I don't exactly, because it makes a majority of Conservatives look fickle and unfortunate to not be in a position where they can actually engage with things intellectually. That's the sort of image they portray by deciding not to challenge things intellectually. That's the first thing. The second thing, ladies and gentlemen, is the idea that, because outside of trying to engage me to suggest that this is the other way around, it's this sort of thing that's not really going to change. Because if GB News was actually doing this legitimately, you know what, you may say they have an agenda, but if they could have actually backed this up without really having to do much work for it, they could have turned things around. Because at this moment, ladies and gentlemen, it's all about how much they can actually generate for profit, and that probably, because it's not really done for the standards of legitimate journalism. It's done for the standards of trying to manipulate people's emotions for a quick buck. That's kind of really all it's about, ladies and gentlemen, and I don't uphold for any one reason or one moment whatsoever that by the time GB News goes, everybody involved will be too rich to, for one moment, just walk away, because all that will matter to them is they just make more money. And that's the only thing that's actually on Nigel Farage's mind right now at the moment. You know what? He wants a Brexit Britain, and he wants, to prove that we can actually cope and we can actually, put things like net zero migration and that their policies all work in it and there will be no opposition. Well, think about how that stands, ladies and gentlemen. Even if Labour was in the saddle, it's literally going to be the exact same issues. Is that no opposition? And bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, if that did happen, GB News would be 10 times more aggressive and far more controversial. So what do you think that says about GB News' standards as regards to, actual criticism and serious debate, when all of it is going to be biased. Is that what you want out of this? Well, I don't. That's not what I go to when I want to actually watch the news. And, well, good luck, GB News, because trust me, you are going to need all the help you can get. Trust me. Like, I could make this video, like, for another 2 hours and go over some more things, but I think I've just about covered all of them. And just to prove I was not biased, I gave Nigel Farage's time in the sun. I gave his time to speak. He tried to explain that the only reason why people hate GB News and why Ofcom is trying to put their foot in is because they're popular and they are taking over. Well, just remember that the whole point about what exactly this has led to, and, well, all the evidence surmounted against them. So bear these things in mind, ladies and gentlemen, and I will see all of you again in the next video. Take care, and bye-bye for now.